I'm impressed, Brian Robertson, that you're one of the people who left TV news, but you didn't get out of what you were good at or what you were doing. You're still a media photographer. You've done that in news for many, many years. You're still using that skill. A lot of us go to PR. I went to teaching. Walden and Larry went to Intel. We got people who all get out of TV and survive. You made a little different shift. You kind of stayed in the business and stayed with your photography roots.
Well, I was really fortunate because Christine Miles was did the public information and did the hiring for my position. So we had already connected, and she knew what kind of stories that she wanted to be produced. She wanted news style storytelling. And so that's what we kind of done. And I think you can also appreciate that photographers, there are some incredible photographers still at KGW. And I think we kind of get pigeoned into this, we can only do one thing. And they don't realize the great resource and logic and storytelling capabilities that photographers have. And I think a lot of photographers could branch into other things, but it's kind of hard for some employers to see them in a different role.
Well, you guys, you included in all the great photographers I worked with at KGW and at K2 as well. It can never be understated how much a good reporter learns from a good photographer. I was learning on the job when I started out of college, and I learned so much about storytelling from good photographers who knew what to shoot, knew how to contribute. Hey, talk to me about this is really good. Let's use this. And then your editing skills by working with you guys and talking to you and watching what you do. I know that's why I became the reporter that I became, because all of you guys taught me many great lessons about storytelling.
Well, actually, the reverse is true for me. I think I came in as the youngest photographer at the time, and which is funny because you're even younger than I am. And you were already there for I got there in 84, 85. You got there, what, in 82?
I interned in 82 and started in January of 83.
Yeah, and so I was kind of in this great incubator with Steve Gosson and Milt Ritter and Bill Weaver and all these incredible shooters. And I just stole from them. And then I worked with some great reporters like you and John Tuttle and Walden Kirsch and Larry, and they really taught me the art of storytelling. Yeah, I was really fortunate. I just landed at the right place at the right time with the right people. It was magical. It really was. It was so much freaking fun.
Yeah.
Like in the 80s and early 90s, it was just fun.
And we talk about the good old days because we always feel that we got to do things a little differently back then, as far as longer stories, more, I hesitate to call them feature stories, but stories about the people and community and happenings. We weren't always hard news. We weren't always live. We weren't always, if it bleeds, it leads. At least for, a decade or so, we were telling stories and communicating with the community what life was about where we were.
Yeah, I think that back in the 80s, all the local stations were an Oregon station. They weren't a Portland station. We traveled across the entire state. And I was thinking one of my most favorite weeks was when we would do summer football camps.
Yeah.
And we would go all over the state, and we produce an hour show with Scott Lynn and, just feature all these different programs. And I remember, I think it was the Crook County Cowboys, and they had to go out and harvest potatoes during the day and then come in and practice at night. And it was a great way to really bring the state together, because what does every town in this state have in common? Every town has a high school and a high school football team.
Yeah. And that was a little bit foretelling because a couple of decades later, everybody had a Friday night football show with helicopters bringing game balls in and that kind of stuff. But you're talking about the high school football special, which my internship year, 1982, that summer, that last month of August, I worked on that with Scott and Alcac. And then as I became a reporter, I helped produce that with you as a photographer and some other photographers for 2 or 3 years before it kind of went by the wayside. But yeah, I do remember traveling around the state and meeting young athletes and coaches and families, and it was a fun way uh, to take the whole state and put it into a real special half hour or hour. You came from Boise, am I right?
Yeah, I graduated from college in '81 at Fresno State, and I kind of knew somebody who knew somebody that worked in Boise, and he left, and I got hired, and it happened to be a King Broadcasting station, which was in the family chain, in the Northwest, and that's where I started. That's where I started my career. I really knew nothing about shooting TV news, and it was. I remember I showed up the first day, and there was 5 photographers and 5 sets of gear, and the guy that left all of his gear, and then the other 4 guys went through his gear and took all the best stuff, and all I had left was a broken camera, cable, broken microphones, and I was somehow supposed to make all that work.
Sink or swim, buddy.
Yeah, it was sink or swim. Yeah, it was fun. That was the first time I lived someplace where it snowed, so I had to learn how to drive a news car in the snow, and it was like a step back in time. In the early '80s, Boise is a much different city than some of the other Northwest cities.
So what was a really good day for you as a news photographer? When you came into work, when did you feel like you were really going to have a good day?
Well, for me, the best days is when I got assigned a reporter and we got to do a feature. Because, I mean, hard news is fun to test your skill sets and being able to react. But going out and meeting people and sharing their stories and especially finding humor is what I loved. And that's what I loved about what you and I did, like with the little athletes. We used to do that special with the kids playing, that you would write we got to shoot a game, and then you would write all these funny moments about the players around in the base and sliding.
Yeah, we called it the little play of the day.
Yeah, so I enjoyed that, and I enjoyed traveling around the state and getting to fly. We hire twin engine planes to fly the stories, and you felt really important arriving and getting in this airport rental car, which was like a broken down Studebaker, and then covering the story and then flying back. And it was a different time. We had resources that certainly aren't available these days to local TV stations.
Yeah, we were lucky. So I was thinking back some of the great stories that you and I got to do together. Do you remember, I think it was titled The Placebo Cat?
Remind me again, the placebo cat?
Placebo Cat. There was a vet's office, I think, in Beaverton or Hillsboro, and they had this cat that was the office cat. And anytime they had to show a pet owner how to give pills to a cat, which is not easy to do. They called this placebo cat, hey, Billy, come here. And Billy'd come up and he'd open up his mouth and they'd stuff a pill down his throat and he'd gag and he'd get a treat and he'd go off. It was his job to be the guinea pig.
I vaguely remember that. Oh my gosh, I vaguely remember that, but yeah.
It's one of the few stories that I think that I did with you that was really kind of funny that I don't have saved. I don't know why.
Yeah.
What I remember, it was a really, the premise is just hilarious that this poor cat gets, jabbed with needles and stuffed with sugar pills just to show people off.
That sounds familiar. I think I had a cat at the time, so
yeah,
I probably could really relate to that. Yeah.
But I thought we did a really good job on it. And then it got nominated for an Emmy and it lost. No big deal. But I remember the story that it lost to was this stupid April Fool's joke where they put $1 on a string and they pulled it away from people that were trying to pick it up.
Oh, yeah.
Which is like, that's candid camera 1960s stuff. We've got a great cat here who's sucking it up for the team.
I thought the Emmys, we have a lot of great photographers that have won a lot of Emmys. I think I won 1 or 2, but yeah, they don't always recognize the best material. I think they, in my book, because I maybe have a different sense of what is an Emmy-winning video. But
well, back then they had a category for humorous stories, so that's the one we were aiming for, obviously. Let's see. Do you remember when we went and did a story on the wrestling coaches?
Oh my God, that's like one of my all-time favorite stories. Yeah, I had I had never gone to a wrestling match before and watched a coach. And I didn't realize there was this other language and this other way of communicating with the wrestlers that I had never. And now when I've shot a couple of stories, including a girls wrestling story for PPS, you know, I end up watching the coach more than I do the wrestlers, because the way their expressions and the way they sit on their seat and the way they, you know, it was one of the, I laughed through that entire shoot, I remember.
Yeah.
For each near fall on the mat, there's one taking place off to the side.
He's hit him!
And since coaches don't have an opponent to grab onto, the chair is a good substitute.
Straighten him up! Here you go, stay between! Lock him up!
Coaches are there to encourage.
Own that mat, baby, own it!
And to instruct. Here are some of the instructions a wrestler gets.
Squeeze, 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 squeeze! Good, good! Heel kick! Watch the Granby! Drag spin! Come on out! Sit out! Up! Get your head up! Hips up! Hips up! Burning! Watch your legs! Watch your legs! Don't let him play with that leg!
Yeah. That was one of those where, I knew that phenomena happened, and then you and I went to cover it, and it turned out better than expected, because we had all those coaches that were yelling and screaming and leaning and trying to wrestle the match by themselves.
And I can't remember, but I don't even know if the athletes or the wrestlers even hear the coach. If it's more cathartic just for the coach to be doing something because he's so frustrated because he can't get in there and perform the reversal on the other wrestler. But
yeah, that was a winner.
I'm trying to remember what schools they were. Maybe it was Oregon City.
Well, it was the state wrestling meet. We had, there were like 10 wrestling mats, so we had all these coaches to choose from. That was easy pickings.
Yeah.
Another one I remember. Do you remember when the boxer Michael Spinks came to town and held a press conference?
Yeah.
Remember what happened there?
No, I don't remember that.
His promoter, his agent, was a guy named Butch Lewis, who was your typical boxing kind of con man, but he had gold chains on and his shirt was open up, and he was talking, and you and I were sitting there, and every time we asked press conference Michael Spinks a question, he'd kind of stutter, and then Butch would jump in and answer the questions. And you and I just kind of winked at each other. Hey, the story here isn't Michael Spinks. It's this other guy.
I know. I remember that now. Oh my God, that was funny. Yeah, I those are fun times. And I'm trying to think. Did you cover the Schuler introduction? Were you there for that? I shot that.
No, I did not. I was not. No, I was there. Brian, with you. That's right. Mike Schuler was the incoming Trailblazer coach replacing Jack Ramsey.
Yeah.
Remember what happened to him?
Yeah, it was. I knew when this happened that was going to be the first thing we show when he was fired. He walked in and they had built a stage, and then they had these curtains hanging behind the stage. And I think Buck Walter, was that his name?
Yeah, and Harry Glickman.
And Harry Glickman introduced him, and he walked in, shook his hands. And he sat down on this folding chair, leaned back, and went head over tea kettle backwards and through the curtain and out. And I think we both looked at each other and just knew this is not a good start to the next Blazer, franchise, storytelling. So yeah,
that's one of those pieces of video that is so infamous. It's probably second only to when the great Corey Long shot the outfielder who ran through the fence at Pacific Stadium. That was classic. You and I also combined to work on the transplant program at OHSU.
Yeah.
Which was fascinating.
That was really a difficult story for me, because that was usually we go out and we meet somebody and we tell their story and then we never see them again. And in this case, we were attached to this, they call it the harvest team, where we'd fly to a city on a plane, obviously, and there'd be like a motorcycle victim or somebody who has passed, and they were harvesting the organ to bring it back. And was there 2 men, right? We had 2 men or 3 and a woman. I'm trying to remember how many, but one was
waiting for transplants.
Waiting for transplants that we were featuring.
Yeah.
And both of them. One was their youngest transplant recipient, I think, at the hospital, and really a nice young man, and he had such a successful transplant, and then he ended up passing away like a month later. And the other one had a complication in surgery. So I had spent time with him before the transplant, and then shortly thereafter, and then to see the tragedy in some ways of what happened was really affected me and really touched me. And it's tough when you get involved in a story like that and you walk away and you have so much empathy for the family and what they went through.
Well, the idea is here's this transplant program and it saves lives and there's a happy ending. And in the case of two people that we followed, it didn't work. Yeah. And that's real life. I remember going into, I forgot who the news director was at the time, after the first guy I think he had a stroke, and he eventually, he was, didn't last much longer after that. But I went to the news director saying, what do we do? And in his wisdom, he said, well, you tell the story. Yeah, because that's part of it, and he was right. Just like you, I was so affected by it. I needed.
I still to this day I remember those faces and such hope, and I was so excited for them. And I remember the nurses telling us, and I don't remember the young man's name, but he was the earliest they'd ever released anybody after a transplant, and I think he had rejection, and this is before they had probably better rejection drugs and other procedures, and that all started after that mushroom poisoning, wasn't it? Isn't that like? Do you remember that?
Why his liver went bad? Yeah.
Remember, there was a mushroom hunter that ate a bunch of death cap mushrooms before we had a transplant team, and they had to send them all over the country for transplants. But anyway, I'm wondering.
Well, I'll tell you an addendum to one of those stories, Brian, was the older gentleman who had the stroke during the surgery. I think it was from Corvallis, but just 3 years ago, I was at dinner with my family in Portland, and I was leaving a small little restaurant, and the guy said, "Mr. Click." And I turned around and said, "Yeah." I said, "You don't know me, but I married Mike's daughter."
Mike, that's right. Yeah.
Mike was the gentleman who needed the liver, and the guy said, "I married his daughter, and I know that she's very appreciative of the story that you told about her dad, and it helps her kind of grieve continually about losing her dad to that liver disease and to the procedure." And it was really moving to chat with this young man for a while. That the story you and I did, that didn't have a happy ending, still had an impact on that family in a good way.
Yeah, and it was all about sharing the program, and most of them are successful, some of them aren't, and it's still an amazing team of surgeons and a program. And I know that it's had trouble up there, but it's really important to our community. Yeah. So.
In that time, it was a major player in the transplant industry. I remember, Brian, I think I specifically asked to have you as a shooter on those stories, just because I knew that it was going to be kind of difficult, because we were going to be at the beck and call of a pager saying the transplant's happening. No matter what would happen, we had, I had to leave my family, you had to leave what you were doing, and we had to go to do the stories. And I just knew that you'd be the right guy for that. You were, obviously. And then you mentioned, we actually remember they paged us. We got on an airplane. You and I flew to Spokane. You went into the surgery when they harvested, I think it was as many organs as they could. I think that was a heart. And then flew back to Portland, and that was put into somebody. In that case, we didn't actually follow the recipient. We were just talking about the process of how the harvest team would hop on a plane, go, come back, and do the job.
And we had to protect the identity of the donor and
the recipient.
And there was a lot of HIPAA regulations, but it was one of those amazing stories that I've had the pleasure of being involved in.
I got to do a follow-up. I'm not sure if it was with you, but several months after we finished that series, the rule back then was that families of recipients and donors could not communicate other than maybe some anonymous cards, thank yous, and that kind of stuff. but I know some families did a really good job of staying in contact, and they allowed a family to meet the family of the donor and the recipient. And we were in the room when that happened, and it was so moving that one family had lost a young daughter, and another family, and the recipient was there in the room who had her heart.
I remember that. I remember something like, and I had a good friend that had was one of the early heart transplants, and he got to know the young woman's parents and family, and is still friends with them today. So it is it's an amazing gift that people can share.
Yeah. And I remember a great thing you told me once. I think it was, well, yeah, it was, remember, the Rajneeshees were this huge story for many years there in the 80s and early 90s. And I mean, I know you went over there to cover it every once in a while with John Tuttle and Walden and Scott Miller and whoever, Pat Cruz worked on some of those stories as well. You had some great stories that you did there. I think, weren't you the only photographer they had a funeral where they actually burned the body in the open and they invited, you were there?
Yeah, that was Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh and his followers believed that the cremation should take place on the property when the people died, but they had to apply for a special DEQ permit to build a crematorium, and they finally got something certified, and they had it built, and then they just so happened to have a follower that was coming up from Los Angeles that died at the commune at the same time. And so they wanted to fly us over to do the very first cremation. And John Tuttle, who was probably one of the finest reporters ever to write a script.
He was. Flat out, he was. I'll say it.
Yeah, he was incredible. And I was really young, and I don't think I'd worked with him much, and I didn't, but he was scared to death of planes. And so they sent me with a grip as somebody that carries a deck and a mic with me. And we went over there by ourselves and flew. And it was the first time I'd been to the ranch. So here I am, I'm like 26, 27 years old. The last 3 years I've been in Boise, where, it's like 1950, Holiday Inn kind of lifestyle of just, and then all of a sudden I'm in this commune where everybody's dressed in, this purple and wearing, I think they call them mollusks. And we were in this huge, huge assembly hall, and everybody was chanting, and they started passing the body over the top. And it was like, where am I? This is so foreign to anything I've ever experienced. And then we walked up this mountain or this trail to the top of this hill alongside all these luminaries, which were just like candles and paper sacks, and got up to the top. And I worked my way up to the front, and they laid the body on top of all this firewood, and then put more wood around him. And then the wife came up and lit the fire, and then they all just started singing and chanting. And it was, I thought, oh my God, I hope I can do justice to the story without the reporter here, because I had to do the interviews and everything else. And then John, with his miraculous touch, was able to make sense of it all. But that was one of the highlights of my life. That was, to experience that was incredible.
That was bizarro world, and you captured it.
Yeah, that was really bizarre. Yeah, it was. And I went back. I was probably fortunate. I probably maybe a dozen times I got to the ranch, and then slowly, and then I was there when the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh got on the plane, and the historic shot of him waving goodbye was something I shot. It was with Tracy Berry, and I were at that location. And I remember when he was waving goodbye, and I said, "Man, this is really a big deal. I got to make sure I'm recording." So I remember we had the 50 decks, and I kept looking down to make sure that light was blinking. If I missed this shot, it was going to be tough to go back into that newsroom. And those are the days where you had wires and everything connected to the camera, and they would short out. And you remember guys would come back without video, and there'd be some equipment problem. And that ended up in that documentary they just did, my shot of him waving goodbye. So.
Anybody listening to this, Wild Wild Country is the documentary they did on Netflix, which is really fun to watch for people like you and I, because you see video that you shot, and I see all the reporters that I worked with back then. I remember you telling me that night when that happened, that you were just had kind of chills because you knew this was the final shot of this epic story of Oregon. It's an historic shot of this religious cultural leader who came here and changed the face of Central Oregon in many ways. Some of it, his people being criminal, and him turning around and waving was, I mean, it was a big moment. It was a historical shot that you got there, and you knew it when you took it. You knew how important it was.
I knew. I wasn't supposed to be there though, because we had crews covering all these different airplanes, and the assignment desk knew it was this one particular plane. And so they sent, I think, Milt Ritter and some of the A-list photographers there, the big guns there. And I was just, you know, I'm new, so kind of new, only been there 4 years, not as proven as some of the, you know, Steve Gossens and the Milt Ritters and Mike Hawkins. So I got the minor plane, and it just so happened that that's the plane he took off on. And so that's why I said, oh, wow, I'm not really supposed to be here to get this shot. I've got to get this shot or my career is over. So I just kept looking at that red light blinking. As long as it's blinking, it's got to be recording. And yeah.
Because
didn't we also at that same time, didn't we have like Scott Miller go to Germany and Tom Ackerman fly to North Carolina? We had like 3 crews going all over the world, and somebody went to India. I remember all at the same time. It was like, wow, that was it. I don't think people who weren't around or experienced TV back then realized how much resources were used and what a huge story that was for Portland and Oregon.
Let's see. What else did I write down here? You were known as a practical joker in the newsroom.
Yeah.
You son of a gun. You pulled some tricks on people, especially new people.
Yeah, that was kind of my reputation. I love pranks, and I love making fun and laughing. And I think part of that helps me kind of process the experience of working in TV news, the stress, sometimes the sad stories. But if you can kind of distract yourself with some pranks, it helped me at least. But my first really good prank was a fellow by the name of Pete Springer. Do you remember Pete? He was on the desk helping Matt Shelley, and he had piercings, tattoos, and dyed hair, and it was his first day, and he was a really young guy, and he was on the desk and he was answering phones, and I walked up to him and I said, "Hey, are you Pete Springer, the new desk assistant?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "I'm Brian Robertson. I'm down from Seattle. I'm with King Broadcasting Human Resources, and I see you're eating your lunch. But when you finish your lunch, you and I need to have a little talk about your drug test." That was my first. You could not get away with these stories today. And then another one, I think it was after you left, was with Laurel Porter. Laurel Porter, moved here from Boston. She had red hair. She had a large family, which to me says, okay, she's probably Catholic. You know, that's just what I'm assuming. So she had been there for a few days, and she walked up to me, and she is the nicest person in the world. And that, for me, is a really good setup. You know, people that are really sweet and nice and
trusting.
They're not aware of what's about to happen. And she goes, "I don't think I've met you." And I said, "Well, Laurel, so nice to meet you. I'm Father Brian. I host a Sunday morning inspirational show." And so everybody else is kind of listening, because now I've been doing this for a while. And they, and she says, "Well, it's really nice to meet you, Father. And I'm from Boston and everything else." So, and then we didn't say anything more than that. We just let her call me Father for a week or so. And so finally, I finally had to play it out, and I go back and I'm talking with her, and she goes, "Father Brian, I don't know if you know this or not, but we're Catholic, and we are actually looking for a parish, and I'm wondering if maybe we can visit your parish sometime." And I said, "Sure, I would love you to come to my parish. It's in Estacada. It's Our Lady of the Evening in Estacada." And she still calls me Father, I think. But you could not get away with this stuff now. This is so politically incorrect. I would be in trouble. So.
Did you plan that one, or did you just off the top of your head?
I just make it up as I go along. In fact, I recently did that with a high school freshman, and I probably shouldn't be doing it at the school district.
You think?
Yeah, probably not. But we had a new school built, and they had all these new security protocols. And one is, working at a school, kids always taking their phones out, talking on their phone during class, and they confiscate the phone and they give it to the campus security officer. And I was doing a story with him, and it was the end of the school day, and the student is walking up to get his phone. He's a freshman, and as he walks up, I'm recording everything, the interaction for B-roll. And then I look around the camera and I said, you know, Josh, as he's handing back his phone, we've already looked through all your pictures. But yeah.
You're going to get sued.
I'm going to get in trouble one of these days, I know.
Oh, buddy. That's fun. Well, belated thanks. When I was teaching there in Vancouver, you came and spoke to my middle school class of video production. That was always good. You did a great job telling people about the business and reliving some of the good stories that we had done together. I appreciated that a lot.
I remember, you brought the Thriller album? Did you have the Thriller album you brought? A record album? And the kid looked up and said, and when you pulled the album out, he said, oh, there's music on both sides. Does
Actually,
that ring a bell?
Yeah, you know what that was? When I was leaving KGW after 20, I believe it was 22 years, they let me do a kind of a goodbye wrap-up story. And we went to the high school that I had done my first story at, which was a sports story, and kind of talked about how things had changed over 22 years. And one of them was we showed them a record album. Back when I started in 1983, this is how you listen to music. And the kids looked at it and had no idea what it was. Because at that point, they were, at least then, which was 2000, 2001, I think, they had got to CDs, which are archaic now too. But that was it. You were working on that story with me.
That was funny. I just remember kind of running 20-year-old reality of our education when we were little compared to them, and surprises that, that they found in our upbringings. Yeah.
So you left a comment on the interview I did with Larry Shoup for the podcast about, I'm glad you didn't mention the Mount Hood Polaroid moment. So we didn't then, because I don't know what it is, but now you got to tell me what it is.
Oh yeah, I watched Larry's interview, and he told a story about us in Kosovo, and we I don't know if you remember, but when you worked in TV news, you had to go to the mountain at least once a week. That's what we did. It didn't matter. When we're short of stories, go to Mountain Hood and find a story.
Yeah.
So we were up there, and I don't know if it was like the last snowfall of the year or whatever else, but Larry and I were there, and we finished our story, and we're in the parking lot putting everything we're in. There's this cute older couple. They're like from like Florida or something, and they're taking pictures, and they've got a Polaroid camera. And Larry loves to tell the story because he thinks it's much funnier than I do. But they, and so I walk up to him, and Larry, and we're talking to him for a little bit, and the wife goes, "We've only got one picture left, and we've got to take a picture." And I said, "You know what? I'm a professional photographer. Let me take this picture for you." And, since you've only got one picture on this Polaroid, and spits it out back in those days. And so Larry said, okay. And so I got them all framed, and I got the camera, and I click, and nothing happened. So then I turned the camera around and figured out what was going on, and click. And then out spits the picture of my front of my nose. And that was their last picture of Mount Hood.
I'm a professional photographer. That might have been the first selfie.
That was, it was a first selfie. I was so embarrassed. I don't know, man. Larry just laughed and laughed, but deservedly so, I guess.
Oh, awesome. Well, you're living the dream these days. Are you still singing with the Gay Men's Chorus?
No, I'm taking a little break after COVID, but I sing in a church choir, and I may start singing again, the next year or so. Mm-hmm. But yeah. I miss singing, but I sang for 27 years, so I had a little break.
I thought I had one of the best jokes I ever told was with the Portland Gay Men's Choir. And they were on AM Northwest when I was hosting. And I think you were singing with them then, but you didn't come because it was a different TV station.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, probably.
Yeah. But so, we had, there were like 30 of these guys in the audience. And we had them sing, and it was beautiful. I mean, they were awesome. And so we did a kind of interview with the leader of the choir, and we did a typical interview. And I said, hey, Let me ask you this: can anybody be in the gay men's choir? Is it chorus? Gay men's chorus?
Yeah, gay men's chorus. Yeah.
And they goes, yeah. I said, so let's say I wanted to be in your chorus. You guys wouldn't try to change me from like baritone to tenor, would you? And this entire choir just starts, I was a little apprehensive, just starts busting out laughing.
Yeah. Oh no, we could make you a baritone. Yeah, we had many straight men and women singing the choir because it's they always said, you know, we've been a victim of discrimination, and so we're not going to practice discrimination ourselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But and the fact that they handled it as well as they did, I loved. But you know, it was funny, but it was relevant, you know, because there's criticism of, you know, gay people trying to recruit people into their orientation or lifestyle, which is totally ridiculous. But they loved it. I was glad they loved it.
Oh no, yeah, we get that all the time. That was a great comeback. Did you audition? You should have auditioned.
Yeah. I can't sing as well as you can. I don't, you know, we didn't talk about it a lot. Did you ever feel discriminated against while you were in the news business? Did you ever have any repercussions?
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up. I did. When there was gay marriage that was approved by the Multnomah County Board, and it was a short window of 2 or 3 weeks. And
big deal.
They changed the charter and everybody's getting married. And I went down to the courthouse, and there was 2 women that had just gotten married, and they turned around and they gave each other a little peck, just a little kiss. And I included that in my VO bite for that night. And the executive director and the news director called me in the office and said that I should have got that pre-approved, that, you know, that some people might find that offensive. And I guess they looked at each other and looking at me, and when they were, you know, they had this kiss, and I said, yeah, you can give him a kiss. And I didn't think it was a big idea because that's very natural in my community. I didn't find it to be offensive at all, but
it's natural at the end of a wedding ceremony.
Yeah, at the end of a wedding ceremony, that you kiss the bride or the groom or whatever, and it was just a kiss. It's a short kiss. Anyway, I got written up for that, and really? I still have that paperwork from the news director. And it was just saying in the future, you know, you need to, you know, these social climate is changing, blah, 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 but we've not, you know, and then I, of course, argued, well, we show straight people kissing all the time. I mean, there's, you know, but I lost, and it was fine. But it did kind of surprise me.
I can understand how in the moment that was, you know, frustrating and probably a little bit intimidating because it's your job. But I would say in the long run now, Brian, that's a badge of honor.
Yeah.
I mean, that letter would be something I would have framed on my wall.
Yeah, I still have it. I was going to post it on Facebook, but the news director's not there anymore, and luckily he moved back to Idaho. So.
Yeah, we could all tell lots of news director stories.
I saw the one with Larry and Tracy, and I want them to know how much I appreciate both of them in that setting, and the leadership that they provided in that newsroom, because Tracy is amazing. I mean, she always went to bat for anybody, anytime. She's just, it was a crazy time. And
yeah, that was a great conversation with Larry. And I remember just Tracy was a leader by example. She was a quiet, subtle leader. She wasn't out front banging drums. She was getting things done because she had the ability and the leverage to do so from her position, and she had just righteousness on her side, as in taking care of people that needed to be taken care of.
Well, can I tell a quick Tracy Berry story?
Love to. There's no such thing as a bad Tracy Berry story in my mind.
So Tracy and I did this franchise piece called News 8 Heroes, and these are people that volunteered in the community to help other people. And we got wind of this woman who had been through the Raphael House for abused women. I think it's called the Raphael House. And after she left that counseling and protection service, she realized that women didn't have, or there was no gifts, there was nothing that they could give the women as they left. So she decided to start making these quilts for every survivor of abuse that went through the Raphael House.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were going to go over and do a story with her, and we show up, and she's got this just a little, single, just a small little apartment in downtown, and she's waiting for us. And she's got very limited means, and we go in, and she's got nothing on her bed but this old Kmart bare thread quilt. But in the corner, there's these stacks of these beautiful quilts that she's making for all these women. And I needed to get some B-roll, and so she started to sew on her sewing machine, and the sewing machine engine burned out.
Broke. And
she didn't have any money to get it repaired. And so we felt really bad. And then as we're leaving, Tracy Berry's walking around sticking $20 bills in different places in her house. And then when she got back, she didn't stop there. She had some arrangements with through her husband and some people at Nike, and they fundraised, and they were able to come up with a brand new or a slightly used commercial grade sewing machine and delivered to her. And I just think in the magic of the universe, somehow Tracy Berry needed to be there that day when her machine broke down, because if Tracy wasn't there, she would not be able to continue to make those quilts for those women. And that's why we love Tracy Berry.
Yeah. And even, get back to how we started. If you weren't doing that story, which was a community feel-good story, it wasn't, a protest or a riot going on someplace where you had to be live. If you weren't telling that story that day, because that's what we did back then in the good old days, neither you or she would have been there.
No, I know. It was crazy. Yeah. It was those franchise pieces, all of those that we did were really touching. And I'm sorry that, I think they're starting to make a comeback in some stations, but I think it's really important that we reflect our community and that we share what's happening in our community, that, and we build up our own community, because there's a lot of really beautiful people in Portland and Clackamas, Washington County, and great stories to share about what kind of difference they're making.
Yeah, and you're still doing that with your job at the school district, being the photographer and telling those stories. So that's great. Man, I'm so glad that we could do this, Brian. I can't express enough how much your friendship meant to me those probably 18 years we were working together. I never had a bad day when I was working with you. And I know that you never came to the newsroom without a great attitude and a great spirit for doing our job right. I should have told you that every day. But
it was just
tell you right now.
It was just a pleasure to work with you. Anytime I saw Carl Click next to my name, I was excited. It was going to be a great day. We were going to have fun, whatever. I think of some of those silly stories, and you showed a lot of them on an earlier podcast. But yeah, I mean, the story about your children and the Christmas lights with Ken McCormick and your son running up and down on the garage door, and the wind Dust Devil and
well, here's another one you and I did. They sent us to the Children's Museum to do the annual story about the 12 best and worst toys for Christmas. And you and I left the building, and we turned the other direction. We went and picked up my 2.5-year-old son at daycare and took him. And as he played with the toys,
right.
We told the stories through his eyes.
That's right. And now, how old's your son now? How old's Jack now?
33.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
33.
So I have time to tell one quick story?
It's a podcast. We can go all day.
This is and I've mentioned this earlier, and it strikes me as funny because it's what I realized was my contribution in the virtual world, and I shared that with you on the email. But
yes.
When at PPS, quite often I will go to different high schools and middle schools that have digital programs, and I'll speak with them, and I'll help them with their videos, and I'll judge and critique their videos and things like that. But the teacher always kind of introduces me. And so, I think, they're going to be impressed by what I tell them. I say, well, yeah, I went to the World Trade Center for the bombing. I covered the NBA Finals. I was at the San Francisco earthquake. And then, and I also shot I Like Turtles.
Back here live at the Waterfront Village with my friend, the zombie, Jonathan. You're looking good. Jonathan just got an awesome face paint job. What do you think?
I like turtles.
All right, you're great zombie. And good times here at the Waterfront Village.
And they paid attention to nothing else other than the fact that they've all seen this I Like Turtles virtual video that Nancy Francis and I shot at the Rose Festival like some 20 years ago that became one of the first virtual videos or viral videos.
Yeah.
We'll think, wow, that's what my career has ended up, just being the I Like Turtle photographer.
Well, I remember when I was teaching, I saw some kids, hey, look at this video. I like turtles. I said, I know the guy that shot that. And I know the reporter that asked the question.
Yeah. And now that kid, he's like got his own brand. His name is Jonathan. He's like probably Jack's age now. And he's, you know, he's famous in his own right. So. Well,
we know that there's the famous I Like Turtles, and I'm going to go on record and say I like Brian Robertson.
And I like Carl Flick. It was great to see you. Thank you for inviting me. This was really, really fun. I feel really honored.